What is communion? I thought I knew, but after studying it, I'm not totally sure. It comes from the Last Supper, right? Where Jesus broke bread and he drank wine. That's part of it, but why did he do that? I made a discussion guide on this like I always do, so if you want to sit down with some friends and talk about it, go to breweryministries.org. We're on Mark chapters 14, verses 10 through 25. So here's the hidden symbolism behind the Last Supper that I dug up. And then that carries into the meaning of communion too, since when we celebrate communion, we're usually remembering the Last Supper. But what's behind the Last Supper? When Christians take communion, they're remembering what Jesus did, but Jesus was celebrating something called the Passover at the Last Supper. And I think he was actually adding on to the meaning of the Passover. So what the heck is the Passover? If you're not Jewish, you probably don't know. It's a Jewish holiday. I didn't know what it was, but it's actually based on something that happened in the book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. In that book, the Jews were slaves in Egypt, and that's the story of how God sent Moses to free them from Egypt. You've probably seen the Ten Commandments, or maybe you've seen the movie version, or you've seen the movie The Prince of Egypt. And if you've seen either of those, then you know that Pharaoh enslaved the Jews. They're also called the Israelites. And God sent Moses in to send a bunch of plagues to convince Pharaoh to let the people go, to let the Jews be released from slavery. But did you know that each plague is actually a direct attack on an Egyptian god? It's really interesting. For instance, one of the plagues is 3 days of darkness. The sun was blotted out for 3 days, right? Well, that was a direct attack on Ra, the Egyptian sun god. Think about it. If the sun is your god and it's supposed to rise and bring life and allow the crops to grow, and then it doesn't rise for 3 days, you're going to wonder, well, what happened to Ra? What happened to the sun god? The Egyptians would panic. Pharaoh would panic. And it was supposed to make Pharaoh be convinced to let the Jews go, release them from slavery. Well, the final plague was basically an attack on Pharaoh himself. And Pharaoh was actually, he believed himself to be the human incarnation of the god Horus. Back in Exodus chapter 1, Pharaoh became afraid that the Jews were becoming too strong. There were too many of them, so he had an entire next generation of Jews killed. He had everyone throw the Jewish male babies into the river. Okay, so Pharaoh commits genocide, and then God says on the 10th plague, okay, Pharaoh, I'm going to pay you back for what you did there, unless you release the Jews from slavery. He basically said he was going to kill Egypt's firstborn sons. There was a way to avoid this, though. If the people killed a perfect lamb and they spread the blood on the doorposts of their home, God said he would spare the firstborn in that household. So Pharaoh didn't listen, but the Israelites killed a lamb and spread the blood on their doorposts, and their firstborn were spared. That is the origin of the Jewish Passover holiday, because the idea is that this angel of death, it doesn't say that, but that's how it's commonly referred to, passed over the homes and passed over the ones with the blood on the doorposts, left those houses alone. That's what the Passover is, and that's what was being celebrated at the Last Supper. So Jesus is conducting this meal to remember that story and help each person there relive the fact that God delivered them from slavery. They're basically celebrating their Independence Day or their 4th of July. Now, what did Jesus do to tweak this story and the symbolism a little bit? You've probably heard of the phrase, "This is my blood shed for you." If you've ever been to a church and you've taken communion, the pastor or the priest will say these words. Well, that's what Jesus said during the Last Supper when he passed around the cups of wine. There are actually 4 cups of wine, so that gets a little confusing. But what Jesus is doing there when he says, "This is my blood shed for you," well, back in the Exodus story, what blood is he talking about? This perfect lamb's blood that they shed and they put over their doorposts so their households would be protected. So Jesus seems to be referring to himself as the perfect lamb that provides protection. I think there's a lot more to the symbolism too, but I just stop there and I think, okay, what does that mean about communion then? I think the meaning goes a lot deeper than we've really thought about before. Whether you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, I really don't think a whole lot of people think about this part of communion. I'm still learning myself. So if you want to explore that a little bit more, you can either read Exodus 1 through 12, or you can print off our discussion guide on this chapter. I get together with some friends at the Poorhouse. Everybody's free to join us. It's a brewery downtown in Wichita on Tuesday nights, 7 to 9 p.m. Or you can go online, go to breweryministries.org, click on free discussion guides, and look for the guide on Mark chapter 14, 10 through 25. Okay, post your thoughts. I'm very curious to see what you'll think of this, as it was new information for me. So I'll talk to you soon.